During my college years, I worked as a babysitter to make some extra cash without committing to a strict work schedule. Most of the time, I looked after a 4-year-old boy from one family a few evenings a week, as his parents often attended work-related dinner events. The boy was quiet, which I appreciated since it made watching him easy. He mostly watched TV or played with toys and seemed to enjoy having me around. This was my 6th time taking care of him. I arrived at their house shortly before his parents left, and they mentioned they'd be back around 11 p.m. They asked me to make sure he was in bed by 9. The first few hours were uneventful. We watched TV, and I made him a small frozen pizza. After finishing his meal, he said he needed to use the bathroom and left for a few minutes. When he returned, he asked me about some strange noises coming from the basement. I was puzzled and quickly turned off the TV. Sure enough, in the silence, I could faintly hear something moving down there. Noticing the boy was nervous, I reassured him that everything was okay and that it was probably just a small animal. I told him to stay in the living room while I went to check it out. The shuffling sounds had stopped by the time I opened the basement door. I had never been down there before since the space was unfinished and had no reason to explore it. I cautiously descended the stairs, turning on the lights as I went. The basement was spacious, filled with storage boxes. I carefully walked around, looking behind a few boxes, but found nothing. Convinced there was no cause for concern, I headed back upstairs. The boy, waiting anxiously on the couch, jumped up when he saw me. I assured him there was nothing to worry about and gave him a hug to calm his nerves. In no time, we had forgotten about the incident. Later, around 9 o'clock, I started getting him ready for bed. After making sure he was settled in his room, I said goodnight and returned downstairs. About 30 to 40 minutes later, while scrolling through my phone on the couch, I heard the shuffling noise again, but this time it was louder. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. Then, I heard the creak of the boy's bedroom door opening, and he called my name. I told him to stay put and not come downstairs. Gripped by fear, I approached the basement door with my phone in hand, ready to call 911. Quietly, I opened the door and turned on the light switch by the stairs. The sound of movement was much closer now, right at the bottom of the stairs. As soon as the light illuminated the space, I saw something that made me freeze. A half-dressed man was crouched at the bottom, rummaging through a storage box. I immediately slammed the door shut, grabbed the boy, and rushed out of the house. From across the street, I called 911 and then contacted the parents, urging them to come home as soon as possible. When the police arrived, I explained what had happened. They searched the house thoroughly and found evidence of someone having stayed in the basement, piles of trash stashed inside boxes, but the man was nowhere to be found. The parents returned shortly after and spoke with the officers. They thanked me for handling the situation and keeping their son safe. An hour later, I finally went home, though I was still shaken. 4 days, I felt on edge and couldn't stop thinking about the incident. I kept in touch with the family for a couple of weeks, hoping for updates, but there was never any news about the intruder. Eventually, I stopped babysitting altogether and lost contact with them. The scariest part was that the man was never caught. He could be hiding in someone else's basement right now, completely unnoticed. My best friend had a 7-year-old daughter named Sarah, and I'd sometimes watch her when they needed help. They lived in a lovely home in Washington, surrounded by forests and mountains. Their nearest neighbors were a couple of miles away, so I always enjoyed the tranquility of staying there. One day, my friend asked if I could take care of Sarah for 2 days while she went on a work trip. I agreed, and a few weeks later, I arrived at their home. We spent some time chatting and had lunch together before she finished packing and left for the airport. I hung out with Sarah for a while, listening to her talk about her school and friend. Later, I took her out to grab some dinner and dessert. We returned to the house around 8 p.m. and decided to watch a movie before bedtime. As I sat on the couch scrolling through the list of movies, Sarah suddenly asked, "Who's that?" I glanced to where she was pointing, at the front door, and then heard a knock. Living in such an isolated spot, I hadn't expected anyone to show up. Feeling uneasy, I cautiously went to the door and opened it a crack. A tall man stood on the porch, looking startled to see me. "Can I help you?" I asked. He leaned slightly to the side, peering through the gap in the door, and said, "Sorry, just checking if anyone was home." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The interaction left me unsettled. I locked the front door, went to the back door, and secured that as well. When Sarah asked who it was, I told her it was just a neighbor, then returned to the couch to pick a movie. We both enjoyed the movie, though it ran longer than I'd anticipated. Once it ended, I told Sarah it was time for bed. I followed her upstairs as she got ready and tucked her in for the night. I came back downstairs, still not feeling tired, so I decided to watch something on TV to wind down. It was a little past 10 p.m. when I began to hear a faint crunching noise. Muting the TV, I listened more closely. The sound seemed to be coming from the back of the house. I went to the back door and flipped on the porch light. Looking out, I saw nothing but the empty porch and trees in the distance. I stayed there for a few minutes, listening intently, but everything remained quiet. Convinced I was imagining things, I returned to the couch. The isolation of the house always felt peaceful during the day, but at night, surrounded by darkness, it made me uneasy. I lay down on the couch to relax and must have dozed off because I woke up a couple of hours later with the TV still on. I switched it off and rubbed my eyes, but an eerie silence in the house gave me a strange feeling. Then, I heard the crunching noise again, this time louder and clearly resembling footsteps. The sound came from the side of the house, right near the room I was in. It stopped suddenly, seemingly just outside a window with closed curtains. Terrified, I tiptoed over to the window and slowly pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. I scanned the area but saw no one. Thinking I was overly tired, I got a glass of water and went upstairs to bed. The next morning, I made breakfast for Sarah, and we discussed our plans for the day. Mid-conversation, she asked, "Why were you walking around outside last night?" Chills ran through me. I asked her what she meant, and she said she'd heard someone walking around the house for nearly an hour after she went to bed. Alarmed, I told her to stay indoors while I went outside to check. Grabbing a small knife for safety, I cautiously walked around the house. It was hard to tell if anything was out of place, but I noticed scratches near some windows and doors. The yard, mostly thick grass, showed no clear footprints. As I circled back to the front door, I saw the same man from the previous day walking down the road past the house. Given how remote the area was, it was strange to see him there again. I went back inside and told Sarah we'd spend the day at the mall to get away from the house. We stayed out until around 6 p.m., and shortly after returning, my friend called to check in. I mentioned the man and described him. My friend said she recognized him. He had shown up a few weeks earlier, asking to stay the night. She had, of course, refused. We agreed that if anything else happened, I'd call the police immediately. That evening, as the sun set, I double-checked all the locks. Around 9 p.m., Sarah and I were playing a board game when we heard a soft tapping sound outside one of the windows. I stood up, trying to stay calm, but then loud scratching came from the wall right next to the window. Grabbing Sarah, I ran with her to the garage. We got in the car, and I reversed out of the driveway quickly, making sure the garage door closed behind us. As we drove away, Sarah said she saw someone running into the trees behind the house. We parked at a nearby hotel and called the police to report the incident. I also called my friend to inform her. 2 officers met us at the hotel, while another pair searched the house. I gave them a description of the man and explained everything. We stayed at the hotel for the night, and the next morning, my friend called to say she'd just landed and would be home in an hour. We returned to the house and waited in the driveway until she arrived. Together, we checked the house and found everything secure. I stayed for a few hours to discuss everything, then headed home. A month later, the man was caught after multiple people reported him trying to break into their homes. What unnerves me the most is that he never explained his actions. In one house he entered, he didn't steal anything, just wandered around and left. It still makes me wonder what he intended to do that night when he came to our door. When I was 13, I had a babysitter who would come by once a week since my mom worked late every Saturday night. I always felt I was too old to have someone watching me and hated the idea of being babysat. Usually, the babysitter was a 20-year-old guy named Thomas, the son of one of my mom's coworkers. Thomas was really odd, and I didn't like him at all. He rarely spoke and always acted awkward and strange. Strangely enough, whenever my mom was around, he'd act overly nice and chatty. I mentioned it to her a few times, but she always brushed it off, saying I just didn't want a babysitter. One Saturday night, things started like any other. Thomas arrived a little late, as he often did. My mom had a quick chat with him before heading out for work. I grabbed my Xbox controller, sat on the couch, and started playing games to kill time. My usual bedtime was 10, so I had about 4 or 5 hours to spend with Thomas, though most of the time, I kept myself busy while he hung out in the kitchen or upstairs in the loft. That night was no different at first. He stayed in the kitchen for a bit, but then I heard him talking to someone. Curious, I tried to listen, but his voice was so low that I couldn't make out what he was saying. The kitchen was just behind the living room, so I knew he wasn't on the phone with me nearby. After a few minutes, the talking stopped. Thomas came into the living room, standing awkwardly near the couch. He was holding his phone and told me that someone was coming over briefly and not to worry. I didn't know how to react other than nodding. The whole situation felt odd. I knew it wasn't something a babysitter should do, but I also knew there wasn't much I could do about it. The next 20 minutes were extremely awkward. Thomas didn't pull out his phone or say much. He just sat on the couch with me, glancing around. Normally, he avoided spending time in the same room as me, so this behavior was unusual. I realized he was probably waiting for whoever was supposed to show up. Eventually, a car pulled into the driveway, and there was a knock at the door. Thomas jumped up and went to answer it. Before opening the door, he turned to me and said he'd be back in a minute. Then he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Feeling curious, I decided to take a look. The blinds on the window were slightly open, giving me a partial view of the driveway. I saw two shadows, Thomas and the man outside. It looked like the man handed Thomas a large bag before getting back into his car and driving away. A few seconds later, I heard the lid of the garbage can outside slam shut. Thomas came back inside, acting nonchalant. I couldn't help but ask him what was going on. He told me it was just his friend dropping off a wallet he had forgotten at his friend's place the previous night. His explanation didn't sit right with me. What about the large bag? But I didn't want to push further, so I just said okay and resumed my game. Things got stranger as the night went on. Over the next hour, Thomas had multiple phone calls, first in the kitchen and then from the loft upstairs. During one of the calls, I could hear him raising his voice, but I still couldn't make out what he was saying. By the time he finished his fifth or sixth call, the same car from earlier returned. Thomas hurried outside again without saying a word. Peeking through the blinds, I could see the two of them arguing, their body language intense. After a while, Thomas left briefly, returning with the same bag from earlier. He handed it to the man, who tossed it into the back seat of his car before driving off. When Thomas came back inside, he looked visibly frustrated. He went straight to the kitchen and didn't come out again until 10 p.m., when he told me it was time for bed. I got ready and went to my room, but I couldn't shake the weirdness of the night. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. I stayed in bed for about 10 minutes before sneaking downstairs to check if Thomas was still there. Sure enough, he was gone, and his car was no longer in the driveway. When my mom came home at midnight, I told her everything that had happened. This time, she believed me and agreed it was unprofessional for him to leave before she got back. The next day, she tried calling Thomas, but he didn't answer. She eventually contacted his mom, who claimed Thomas had come home feeling unwell. We both knew that excuse didn't make sense. He could have easily called to let us know if he wasn't feeling well. It's been almost a decade since that strange night, but I still think about it from time to time. I always wonder what was in that bag, why he argued with the man, and why he left so abruptly. Whatever it was, it still gives me chills. You know those horror films where the babysitter is left alone in an old creaky house on Halloween night? Well, that was pretty much my life in 2017. Except, I wasn't the calm, collected protagonist. I was a 17-year-old high school junior with a sarcastic streak and zero survival skills. Somehow, I got talked into babysitting for the Hamiltons, a family with 3 kids under 10, at their farmhouse outside Madison, Wisconsin. Sure, the extra cash was tempting, but spending the most unsettling night of the year in the middle of nowhere? Definitely not my idea of a good time. The farmhouse could have been pulled straight out of a horror movie. It had creaky wooden floors, dim lighting, no neighbors in sight, and a backyard that stretched into endless rows of cornfield. Even the jack-o'-lanterns on the porch seemed to smirk at me as I stepped inside. The kids, Megan, age 6, and the twins, Ryan and Max, age 8, were thrilled though. They'd already devoured most of their Halloween candy before I arrived, and their sugar highs were in full swing. "Can we watch a scary movie?" Ryan asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "No way," Megan protested. "Those are too scary. How about something in the middle?" I suggested, rummaging through the Hamiltons' modest DVD collection. We settled on Coraline. It wasn't overly terrifying, but its creepy vibe fit the Halloween mood. About 20 minutes into the movie, the landline rang. The sound startled me. Who even uses landlines anymore? Megan and the twins looked at me expectantly as I got up to answer. Hanging on the kitchen wall was an old battery-powered satellite phone, the kind farmers use for emergencies. The caller ID was blank. I picked it up, expecting it to be a neighbor or maybe the Hamiltons checking in. "Hello?" I said, holding the phone to my ear. Silence. Then, faint breathing. "A prank call. Classic." "Very funny," I said flatly. "Goodbye." I hung up and returned to the couch, brushing it off as some teenager messing around. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, when I answered, a raspy voice whispered, "I'm watching you." I forced a laugh, even though it didn't feel funny. "Nice try," I said. "Happy Halloween to you too." I slammed the phone down, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. The kids noticed. "Who was it?" Megan asked. "Just someone playing a joke," I replied, forcing a smile that probably didn't look convincing. "Don't worry about it. We got through most of the movie without incident." But just as the other mother revealed her true form, the screen flickered and went black. At first, I thought the DVD had glitched. Then I realized the lights had gone out, too. "Is it a power outage?" Max asked, his voice trembling. "Probably," I said, grabbing my phone to use as a flashlight. "Let me check the breaker." The breaker box was, of course, in the basement. A total cliché. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the air growing colder with each step. My flashlight cast shaky beams over dusty shelves and cobwebbed corners. When I reached the breaker, everything seemed normal. All the switches were in place. Then I heard faint footsteps above me. When I got back upstairs, the kids were huddled on the couch, illuminated by my flashlight. The landline rang again, piercing the silence. "Don't answer it," Megan whispered, clutching a pillow. But I did. This time, the voice on the other end said, "You really shouldn't have gone downstairs." My heart froze. "Who is this?" I stammered. Click. The line went dead. I turned to the kids, trying to stay calm. "Let's all stay in one room, okay? It's probably just someone trying to scare us," Ryan said. "Exactly," I lied. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one, then ushered the kids into the master bedroom. I told them it was a camping adventure and tried to make it fun, but the tension was palpable. I propped a chair under the doorknob for good measure and sat on the bed, phone in hand. I wanted to read to the kids to distract them, but the books were in the living room. I told them to stay put, lock the door after I left, and only open it if they heard my voice. As I headed downstairs, I noticed muddy footprints trailing from the back door, which I swore I'd locked, through the kitchen and into the hallway. My heart pounded as I followed them. Someone had been inside. I whispered the details to the 911 operator, explaining the situation as the kids stayed hidden. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way, but out here, it could take time. Then I heard a low creak from the hallway. My flashlight flickered as I swung it toward the sound. Nothing. I bolted back to the bedroom and locked the door. The police are coming, I told the kids. We just have to stay quiet and wait. The faint sound of breathing outside the door told me we might not have much time. The door handle jiggled. The kids froze, their wide eyes locked on me. I grabbed a lamp, ready to use it as a weapon. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The jiggling stopped. Silence. Then footsteps moved to the room next door. Drawers opened and closed. Whoever was out there was searching for something. A loud crash startled us. It sounded like a vase or picture frame shattering in the hallway. The kids huddled closer, their eyes pleading with me for reassurance. I held my breath, praying the chair against the door would hold. Then, finally, I heard sirens in the distance. The footsteps outside the door turned into quick, heavy thuds, followed by the roar of a motorcycle engine. The sound grew louder, then faded into the night. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. A loud knock came at the front door. The police were here. I led the kids out of the room on shaky legs, relief washing over me as we reached safety. The officers searched the house and surrounding property. They didn't find the intruder, but they did find clear signs of forced entry, muddy footprints, scattered items, and drawers pulled open. That night, as I recounted the events to the officers, I realized how close we'd come to something far worse. The Hamiltons returned home in a panic, apologizing profusely. I couldn't stay the rest of the night. As I drove home, the adrenaline wore off, leaving me exhausted and shaken. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday, a time for fun and harmless scares. But after that night, I've learned to take every strange call and unfamiliar sound seriously. Sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't in movies or books. They're the ones standing just outside your door. If these babysitting horror stories sent shivers down your spine, be sure to hit that like button and share this video with your boldest friends. Got a creepy babysitting tale of your own? Drop it in the comments or email me. I'd love to feature your story in a future video. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to catch our next bone-chilling upload. And remember, babysitting isn't just about looking after the kids. It's about staying vigilant. Stay safe and thanks for watching. See you in the next video.